Since Europe found the New World, Cuba has never been free from the influence of other countries. In the late 19th century, Cuba was considered an individual country but was controlled by America. Under American control, Cubans abided by American ideals but were held from power. However, America made poor choices with this power, and because of this, Cuba had many nationalist presidencies that bordered dictatorships, with America only stepping in when they needed to. When Fidel Castro successfully toppled this government, Cuba saw him as a symbol of freedom, and in part he was. In 1492, Christopher Columbus is credited with the discovery of Cuba. During this war, Cuba was a Spanish colony, and no notable historical events were recorded until the War of 1898. According to Britannica.com, the Spanish-American War in 1898 was a conflict between the United States and Spain that ended Spanish colonial rule in the Americas and resulted in U.S. acquisition of territories in the Western Pacific and Latin America. One of these territories was Cuba, and on May 20th, 1902, Cuba became an independent country. The Platt Amendment is a good example of the control America had over Cuba. The amendment did as follows. Cuba promised not to incur debts over its current revenues could not bear, to continue the sanitary administration undertaken by the U.S. government, to release naval stations to the U.S., and, if necessary, to permit the U.S. to intervene in order to preserve American independence and a government adequate to protect life and property. According to this amendment, America could intervene at any time with internal Cuban affairs. Wikipedia states under the Corruption in Cuba header, the Republic of Cuba at the turn of the 20th century was largely characterized by a deeply ingrained tradition of corruption where political participation resulted in opportunities for elites to engage in wealth accumulation. And it truly was. Throughout much of the 20th century, corruption and power grabs were common. Before the Cuban Revolution we know and love, Cuba had one dictatorship previously. It was just before Castro's rule. Fulgencio Batista was the leader of the army at the time, and he had American backing. Now this is important as Batista controlled the government completely for about 25 years due to this backing. During this time, the Platt Amendment was removed, which meant America could no longer lawfully intervene. By the time 1958 had arrived, Batista had seen the writing on the wall. Fidel Castro, after 5 years of revolution, had control over Cuba. Because of this, many things happened, including governmental stability, despite how bad the government was, mass immigration out of the country due to restrictive policies, Bay of Pigs, which was a failed democratic takeover, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Revolution is an important moment in world history that is often overlooked and led to Cuba being a much more substantial political force. Despite Fidel Castro's shortcomings, he still brought forward a new era of Cuban history due to the stability his regime brought, as well as movement away from U.S. control and oversight. Cuba today would not be the same if it were not for this substantial point in history.